if I'm thinking about myself, I'm thinking about myself and I can't think about other people. And so I think that God's calling us to not worry about ourselves. That's the beautiful C.S. Lewis quote, right? That humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. Like just stop thinking about yourself as often. And then you're freed up. Let Christ take care of you. And you're freed up to then just go serve people, even in your, your frailty, your fear, your humanness. God can still use you.
This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Own It Show. My name's Justin Roethlingshoefer. And as always, we're here bringing you live coverage of really how to live a life in ownership. And if you are new, this is coming up on episode 285. So there's 285 episodes all in the books, all published that you guys can dive into to figure out how you lean into your God-given calling. Because when you lean into that little nudge, when you lean into that feeling, when you lean into that whisper, that's when life changes. And that's a life in ownership. And so if you like this, if this brings value to you, be sure you share it. Be sure you send a comment, share it with a friend, share someone that needs an uplifting message, because we all have a mission. We have all been here to be world-class at something. And when we can be inspired by the littlest tweak and you pour into somebody, you don't know the impact that it will make, not only on them, but ultimately on the world. And so as we come in and I bring you today's guest, I could not be more excited because I've had the pleasure of being in a mastermind with this individual and seeing his heart for his wife, for his family, understanding his story, where he's come from, and now what he's putting into the world and the way that God's anointed his life is nothing short of inspirational and miraculous. And when you can see God doing work in somebody else's life and have a testimony to that, it just solidifies the fact that he is faithful and that he will continue to show up in a multitude of different ways. And so, Graham, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the Own It Show. And I cannot wait for you to share your story and what you're doing and what you're bringing into this world with everybody else. So Own It World, Graham Cochrane.
Dude, Justin, thanks for the intro. Super encouraged. Already good for the day. I'm all filled up now. My cup is full. Thank you.
I love it. Well, hopefully, audience, you guys will stick around. I didn't fill your cups up too much already, but Graham, I'd love for you to just kind of lean in. And I know you talk about this. I've heard you recount this specifically, but even just the way that you talk about going, the way that your life was when you dove in and ultimately went through this recession, and that entrepreneurship wasn't really like your first bet, wasn't your first calling, wasn't like, hey, this is what I'm all about. This is where I'm going. This is my mission. This is what I'm convicted to do. It wasn't like that. It wasn't a big waving flag. It was something that was just earned through obedience, if you will. And I'd love for you to kind of lean into that a little bit.
Yeah. In 2009, my life kind of changed. We moved down from Virginia to Florida, moved 1,000 miles away, my wife and I, to help some friends plant a church in Tampa, Florida. And so we thought, hey, we want to be a part of something that God's doing. We left our jobs, left our home, and figured we'd get new jobs and start a new life. And it'd be fun and easy is what we thought it would be. And it was neither fun nor easy. It was hard and a lot of spiritual warfare. And in that process, we had bought our first house, had my first baby, and then I lost my second job in about 10 months. And if you remember, 2008, 2009 was kind of a squirrely time, right? And it kind of feels like some ways how it feels now, a lot of uncertainty. And so it's hard to get work. And when I lost my job, I thought, you know what? I don't really want to go back to work. I really kind of hate being at a desk. I always wanted to be a musician. That's what I always imagined, being on the stage, performing, always having something out of the box. I could never imagine myself as a normal 9-to-5er, and yet that's where I found myself. So I didn't want to go back. And I got this crazy idea from the Lord of, well, why don't you start a blog about what you know how to do, which at the time, my skill set at the time was music recording. I was an audio engineer. I could make records for bands, and I did a little bit of freelance on the side. And I thought, well, maybe this is the nudge I need to kind of go full time on this. And I didn't know anybody in town. So I started a blog thinking if I could get online, share what I'm doing on the internet, maybe more people would hear about what I'm doing and hire me. And so that began a long journey of just trying to find a way to make a living online, get some clients, scrap around for any kind of income I could find. Not entrepreneurial, like you said, in the sense that I didn't have a grand vision. I wasn't confident. I didn't even know what I was doing in terms of the business model I was discovering, which is a content creator now, educator. I sell online courses, memberships, coaching. This is a very common world now, but 14 years ago, it was kind of the dark ages, and I didn't know anyone that was doing what I was figuring it out. So it was not only I needed to make money, but God was shifting the way I thought about the value that I had to bring to the world. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I love what you talk about. And if you kind of come back to this, when I was reading your story and kind of like the background, you talk about your blog, and really it was your brother and your mom that were the ones that read it. And I can resonate with that so heavily because this podcast, for the first 47 episodes, had 6 downloads each. And
wow.
And the 5 of them were my family. And I get text message from my mom. Oh, today's show was awesome. I was like, thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah.
I appreciate you. And now it's like 50,000, which it only is there because it's been a slow, gradual gain.
Yeah.
And it's the consistency of showing up and doing this day in and day out. And there's been iterations, and what it looked like on episode 1, I listened back to it. I'm like, oh man, that was so bad and like terrible. Yeah. But I'm sure the same thing happens with you, especially when you talk. And guys, everybody listening to this, I really encourage you to go look up what Graham's doing, because what he's very modest when he talks about this. Is he's been awarded every award under the sun when it comes to his YouTube growth and his ability to have. He's got like the silver and gold YouTube buttons, and for like 1 million subscribers or whatever it is that people have that are listening. And he just knows how to create content in a way in which is impactful and purposeful. And it's just really, really compelling to be able to see that. And so as you kind of went on this journey, Graham, what was the turning point for you when it came to, hey, I need to just go and make some cash and figure out a way to do things? Because I'm sure there was a scarcity mindset that crept in. I'm sure there was a fear-based mindset that crept in. I'm sure there was this feeling of inadequacy that was potentially there. How did you overcome that to ultimately become this successful, creative person that lived in you, was still alive in you that day? But what propelled you into that?
Yeah, I mean, there was two parts of it, right? One is, if you're in the business that I'm in, which it really is about audience building, and that's what you're doing with this podcast too. And like you're speaking, and you've got a book coming out. It all is predicated on having an audience of people that know what you do, love what you do, and are impacted by what you do. So part of what I'm doing is audience building, and you can build a big audience and still not make money off of it, because there's another part, which is monetizing that audience. And I didn't know how to do either. And so I'm in the dark discovering how to do both. And so what came first was the audience building. It wasn't huge, but I early on, when I started a YouTube channel and started teaching at the time, music recording tutorials, what equipment to buy, how to use it, how to make it sound professional, people started to find it. And they started to watch it and read it and leave comments. And you could tell, even though the audience was small, and I know what you mean when you have 6 downloads per episode. I know when I had 6 views per view on my YouTube videos. Even the small group of people, you could sense there was a hunger for more. And it surprised me. Like, they were, this was amazing. Or the way you explained this made sense for me for the first time. Or I never heard this before. Or could you do a video on X or Y or Z? And all these natural comments would come. And it was a clue to me that, wait a second, people are liking this. There's something here. And that was the only indication I had that I was onto something. And I was wanting to figure out, could I grow that and figure out what it is they wanted more of? And then the second part was, could I monetize it? And there's lots of ways to monetize an audience. And I ended up moving towards the digital products route, having online video courses and paid communities and things like that. But to your point about consistency, I learned a big lesson about consistency, and I love the name of your show, Own It, because when you have no money and no prospects of making money and pressure to make money for a family, you get desperate and you get focused. And so you're very honest with yourself. You realize, well, there's a lot I realized I can't control. And once I burned through my savings and we were on food stamps and I was like, okay, I'm out of money. It's embarrassing. It's a tough time. I can't magically make something happen. But what can I control? I can go into my little home office, aka the spare bedroom. I can sit there for a reasonable time from 8 to 5 or whatever, and try to connect with as many people online as possible. Consistently put out new content. That's all I could control. I couldn't control if people found it or loved it or if it blew up or went viral, but I could control that I would produce it and publish it, write an article, send out an email, put up a video. And it's funny because there's so much emphasis in my world in the digital content space and like YouTube space, let's say, there's so much emphasis on what's the formula, how do you go viral? And there's too much emphasis on that. There's not enough emphasis on the really boring stuff, which is, can you show up every single week, posting pieces of content every single week for decades? If you can do that, you have a much better chance of winning. And I don't have any viral videos in terms of like the formula. I've had some do really well, a few million views, but it's not really about the sexy things as much as it's about those consistent seeds you're planting in the soil. And that was the only thing I could do, which was great. So I got really good at showing up every single week and listening to my audience and learning what they liked and what they didn't like, which told me everything, not only how to grow, but also what products to give them and sell to them and what offers they wanted and how they didn't like other people in my space that were doing the similar thing and why they didn't like them. What they liked about me. And that made it that gave me the superpower, which was serve the people. Give the people what they want, give them a reason to keep showing up every week and engaging with your content. And once you have that loyal fan base that love you and trust you, then you can build anything off of it.
I love what you just said there, because in Matthew 6, it talks about showing up and your left hand not knowing what your right hand is doing. And basically what they're trying to communicate is that it has nothing to do about you. It has nothing to do about vaulting you, but rather about serving people. And when you truly serve people, it changes and creates a movement, and people realize that. People can feel that when something is made for them to impact them and help them and be able to restore some new level of normalcy in their life and give them a sense of control, they can feel that versus when it's done for somebody else, when it's done for just to hear your own voice, just to have yourself vaulted. And what was kind of your process to figure out what your audience wanted, what your audience needed? And what was that level of service orientation like for you?
Yeah. So for me, I'm like writing 2 blog articles a week and 1 video a week. And I would start by serving the avatar that I didn't know people. So I would serve the me 10 years prior, right?
Yep.
What problems did I have 10 years ago? What desires did I have? What kind of language did I use? What other solutions was I trying that weren't working? So I started with the premise of, I'm sure there's more people who were just like me a few years back and I could serve them. Then that's like, in the content world, I call it, you've got like, planned content and demand content. So the planned content is what you plan to put out in the world, and demand content is really you responding to what you're getting, the feedback you're getting when people are like, hey, could you do something on this? Or what about this question? Or I'm stuck here. And so it's like this, 2-way conversation. So I started with planning out content that I thought would help people. And the more I put it out, then I would get some feedback and realize what people wanted. And so the great thing about what I do is it'd be like being on keynotes. Like, you speak and go all over the place and speak. If you could give 3 keynotes a week. And really, if those 3 keynotes you could also give them like 10 times all over the world and replicate those keynotes per week. And then just keep giving all those keynotes. Every single keynote you have, someone would come up to you, multiple people would come up and say what they liked, what they didn't like, what other questions they had. You would get hundreds and hundreds of data points per week on what real people think about what you're putting out there in the world that would help you shape the keynotes for next week and the week after and the week after. I mean, if you could physically speak 10 times a day, every day, for your entire life, like within 6 months, like you would be world class because you would know everything that everyone struggles with. So then you could tailor your content to really speak to them. And it's that power of empathy of, hey, I know what you're dealing with. They think you're reading their mind. And it's only because you've spoken to so many other people that are just like them. And no one's really that unique when it comes to their problems. They all have the same similar problems. So in a way, putting out content on the internet helped me functionally keynote all over the world really fast and get real world data on what people wanted. And I just decided I don't have any pedigree in my space. there was a lot of imposter syndrome. Why should somebody learn from me? I don't have Grammy Awards. I don't have clients that are famous. Like the bands that I was producing are indie artists you have never heard of. So why would they listen to me? I can't lean on pedigree, but I could lean on my ability to listen to them, hear their real challenges and problems, and give them answers that are specific to them, and not make it all about me. And so that worked to my advantage. It endeared me to people, made me relatable, and it's powerful. And that's become even more true this day and age. No matter what you do, if you create any kind of content online, the more relatable you can be in terms of being a approachable, vulnerable person. Brene Brown's made a living talking about the power of vulnerability. If you could just be honest about what you believe and who you are and your strengths and your weaknesses, even as a public figure, people are endeared to that. They trust you more as opposed to the slick guru of maybe the 80s, 90s. And that's a powerful thing to have. And it's easier to just be yourself than to be a slick, polished version of yourself anyway.
Somebody always says, be yourself, because the other person is already taken. It's just showing up as you in a vulnerable way. And guys, I don't want you to miss out on that. Like, lean on the ability to serve, lean on the ability to show up for other people. And I want to come back to something you mentioned, which is imposter syndrome, because it's something I've felt many a times. I think anybody who's creating content, who's trying to show up, who's trying to serve people is going to have that level of imposter syndrome. And when you think about a mindset that has to come along with this, I really only say there's four mindsets. There's four types of mindsets. It's impossible, possible, probable, and inevitable. And when you are rooted in your calling, when you're rooted in what you have a true desire to do, that gives you permission to have an inevitable mindset. That if you stay consistent, you continue to lean into it, you are going to be successful because you are serving people from the calling that is God-given. And so I'd love to kind of come back to you on your journey, what you did to overcome, because again, by the word of our testimony, we are able to overcome anything. And so I'd love to be able to share that with people who are feeling that, because again, Ed Mylett talks about it all the time. He still has imposter syndrome a lot of times when he's leading on things. And John Gordon, a mutual friend of ours, has the same thing. And all of these people talk about this, but what have you been able to do to help overcome that imposter syndrome and lean in and create and continue to create great content?
Yeah, I think everyone has imposter syndrome. The difference is whether you allow it to hold you back or not. And what I try to do with myself and with my students to help us combat imposter syndrome is just kind of spotlight the fact that imposter syndrome is kind of narcissistic. You're kind of obsessed with yourself, in a negative way.
That's good.
So it's like, do you really want to be all about yourself, or are you really going to be about other people? If you're really about other people, then stop worrying about yourself and feeling so insecure. Just get out there and do something, even if it's scary. And man, that whips me into shape real quick when I think about, for example, I was in my first brand, The Recording Revolution. It's in the music space, big YouTube channel, big fish in a small pond. The first time I ever made real good money and was surprised. And my wife and I are living our best life ever. And I was like, I'm happy. This is great. And then I had this itch, God was calling me to do more. He's like, I want you to teach this business model to people. And I said, man, that would be fun. But that would be scary, because then I would be calling myself a business coach and I'd be moving into the business niche. And there is so many more people, right? It's one of the big three, like relationships, health, and making money. And the people in the business space are huge. Like, you're literally going to jump into a pond where Tony Robbins is in that pond and Ed Mylett's in that pond. And you've got all kinds of people that can teach you how to be successful in these areas. And it's like, I don't really want to get into that space. And so I punted for almost 3 years just out of fear.
Wow.
And until I realized, this isn't going to go away. The fear is not going away. I don't know what date in the future I'm waiting for me to be not afraid of it. And then B, think of all the people I could have helped these last 3 years. they're looking for help. And even though I think there's lots of people out there helping, there's no one who's me, who says it the way I say it, who has my worldview. And as a Christian, I've always felt like I'm light in darkness, the displacement theory. Like, as long as I'm bringing the light of Christ in the industry that I'm in, even if I just show up, by just virtue of showing up, I'm displacing some darkness. So in the music space, I've done that for 14 years. And then now in the business space, both of which are very dark industries. And so I thought, man, I just got to get in there. And so, man, I've been afraid. I've been afraid the whole time. I was afraid when I got successful. I was afraid when I published a book. I was afraid to join the mastermind that we're in, because I was like, I'm going to be around people that are way more successful than me. I'm going to feel like, do I really belong here? And, it's the imposter syndrome again. But man, if I'm thinking about myself, I'm thinking about myself, and I can't think about other people. And so I think that God's calling us to not worry about ourselves. That's the beautiful C.S. Lewis quote, right? That humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. Like, just stop thinking about yourself as often. And then you're freed up. Let Christ take care of you. And you're freed up to then just go serve people, even in your frailty, your fear, your humanness. God can still use you. And he uses the people that say yes to him. So I want to say yes.
Dude, that's so good. It's so good. We have a saying in our household, and it's say yes to different. Say yes to different. And
that's good.
It's something that Elise and I live by. It's one of our core values in our marriage, in our household, how we run our family. But say yes to different. And it just brings me back to that, because when you live a life that's different, you yield different results. You feel different. You see things differently. And like, our purpose is somebody else's miracle. And that fear that we're feeling is just holding us back from ultimately serving those people that you're talking about. And you touched on something within the mastermind. It's funny that you say that you had this like feeling of inadequacy, this feeling of, man, like, should I really even belong here? Like, should I be in this? And you're probably the 15th person that I've heard say that, because Elise and I felt that going in. We're like, man, like, do we belong here? Is this a place that we should really be with all of these successful people? And yet every single person we've spoken with, they've all said the same thing. Man, we didn't know if like we belong there. And so for listeners, you're always going to have that feeling. I love what you said, Graham, where the feeling doesn't go away. No matter, the more impact you have, the bigger your following, the more email lists that you have, the more people in your congregation, the more people in your community, it doesn't make the feeling go away. You can never earn your way to not feeling like you don't belong. Why? Because you've been called to something great. You've been called to do that. And God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And so as you become obedient to what is being put on your heart, obedient to what you're being called to, that's spiritual maturity. And we're going to continue to hear that more and more and more. And Graham, as you practiced this, as you became more aware to your callings, as you leaned in more, what did you ultimately realize in your life? What ultimately was bestowed upon you as you continue to be obedient in these callings?
Man, God just blesses obedience in creative ways.
Give some stories, because I want the audience to like really see it, because the way that he's blessed you and the way that you've been able to realize these giftings from this has been, it's so beautiful to see.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways. Like, for one, part of our story is a story of our generosity story. And God was trying to teach us early on what it means to give, and how to give generously, and how to trust him, and how to watch his power of provision work. And so I grew up like understanding the concept of a tithe. And so I'm also like a first child, like rule follower. So I'll just, whatever the right thing is to do, I'll do it. So we tithed, 10%. And that was because I thought it was the right thing to do. And then when we moved to Florida, lost my job and the income went away, then came the question of how, Lord, and I'm starting a business, never done that before. I've always had regular income. So it was easy to do the 10%. So Lord, how do I how do I tithe off of money that I don't know I'm going to make, or don't know how much I'm going to make, or if I'm going to make any money? And how do I do that as a first fruits in faith? I don't know how to do that. I want to give in faith, and I want you to show me how to do that. And so he gave me a number, and I shared a little bit of this in the mastermind, but he told us, this was kind of after year one of like, after I lost my job, going into year two, he told us to tithe off of $60,000. This is the strangest thing. I felt the Holy Spirit tell me, tithe as if you made $60,000. Data point, we were making about $500 a month from a little stipend that the church was giving me because I was a volunteer worship leader. I was like our only consistent income. So data point also, that $500 a month is a tithe off of $60,000 a year. And I was like, that's basically what we make, Lord. But if you say so, and so I was like, Shay, you got to go get like a wedding gig. She was a photographer. We need to make some money to be able to do this whole tithing thing. And so we committed to that, that $6,000 a year, which is 10%. And I wanted to do it per month. So I was like $500 a month guaranteed, and we'll just trust the Lord. And didn't make hardly any money the first half of the year, but the back half of that year, we ended the year at $65,000.
Wow.
And that did three things. One, it got us off of food stamps. We no longer qualified, which is awesome. B, I realized, we're going to be okay. We can live, we're not going to be in the gutter. But three, I was like, God did it. He totally did it. We had to give in faith, but he did it. And it seemed so out of the blue. How did that happen? And then he did it again the next year. He gave us a number and to tithe off of a number, and he grew the business to that number at the end of the year, and did it again and again and again. It started to blow our minds on the generosity piece, in terms of, if you trust me and if you'll sow these seeds of generosity, which again, I didn't have any background in this. And this was if anything, my church would have frowned upon this kind of interaction with the Lord, which is, they would have dubbed it a little bit of prosperity theory, theology. And I was just doing whatever I felt the Spirit was telling me to do. And he was showing up in a big way. And not only in growing our business, but I'm this nobody in the back of my house in Tampa, Florida. I'm nobody in the music industry, and that somehow he was connecting me with some of the biggest players in the music industry. And someone would say, "Well, I saw your video, or I've seen your channel, or I like what you're doing," and it'd be these my heroes in the music space, these Grammy Award-winning producers and mixers and audio engineers. And I would fly out to LA and be on these people's shows, and I would go to these things, and I was somehow going through the back door to the music industry. I always wanted to be a rock star, and I wasn't, but I was through the back door. I got into sort of hobnob with some of these people and be able to be a witness to them, and be able to display the kingdom of God to them, because the kingdom of God smells and tastes and sounds so different than the kingdom of the world. But he opened up doors that I should never have been able to walk into. And he's done that again in this space, where it just seems like, when I don't know how to make a connection, and I'm introverted by nature, so I'm not the guy that's going to go hit the pavement and talk to everybody. I don't have that boisterous personality, which I think is wonderful, where you can just you're going to be relentless and be making friends with the famous people that have influence. I kind of hang back and I kind of wait, and God will then say, talk to this person, or someone will call, or I'll get an email, or I'll get this nudge, you should go to this event. And I don't know why. So I go and I walk around, and then I bump into somebody, and it's just following the leading of the Spirit. Even when I didn't have a vocabulary for that years ago, I've just seen God do incredible things. And then just this week, bro, I was, a few weeks ago, I got connected with John Gordon, mutual friends. And I felt the Spirit say, he's doing what you want to do. He's speaking. You want to speak more. He's written a ton of books. You've written one. You want to write more. You should ask him for help. So he's probably busy and expensive. And so, but God kind of told me to. So I did. I said, "Hey, John, would you help me, man? And I'll pay whatever." And he agreed to meet with me. And he was relentless in helping me crystallize this new book idea. And in one afternoon, we had this idea, and then I pitched it to my publisher, and he's like, "Let's do it." And as of yesterday, we're going to do book number 2. And it's so good. And it came out of nowhere, because God connected me with somebody I would never have known, and prompted me to step out in faith and be like, "I don't want to be that guy, but I need help. Would you help me?" And God gave me favor, and not because I deserve it. And I remember asking John, "Why did you help me, bro?" He's like, "God told me to." So I'm like, okay. So God can do anything, even when you think he's done doing things for you. And I don't know if anyone's related to this, but I felt this, and I have had a fear of asking God for more, because I feel like I don't want to bother him. He's done so much for me, and more than I thought I would ever have in my life. So I can't ask him for yet more and more and more opportunities. And I want to give more to the world and do more and have more impact and help more people. And shouldn't I just chill out a little bit? And God's trying to just show me that I'm so limited in my thinking, and he's so unlimited in his desire to partner with us and empower us. And to your point, call us higher. And this has been a education for me in recent years.
I love it. I love it. Can you dive in a little bit to like this new book idea? If you can kind of just outline it for our crew, we can get a little behind the scenes action here. If it's not contractually like stipulating.
Yeah. I mean, the concept is simple. I mean, it's kind of similar to your family motto, say yes to different. The idea is about basically rebelling against the way we're all conforming. We're all conforming in one way or shape or form, right? We conform in the way we think about how we manage our money, how we think about our work and career, our families, our health. You know about this. Like the default of any of these areas of our lives is to just conform to what everyone else is doing. And so the question is, do you like the way that's turning out? How is conformity working for your marriage, for your health, for your finances, for your career? When I was growing up, conformity and career looked like just do what my mom and dad did. Get a normal, safe, stable job with benefits. Please, Graham, that's what you're supposed to do. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And I wanted to rebel against that. And I wanted to choose something different. And there's beauty in making those contrary decisions. And instead of conforming, creating something unique and something different and creating the life that you want to live. But it's scary. It's scary to go against the grain because you'll get criticized, you'll get name called, you'll feel, isolated, and you'll question it the entire way. Like, am I doing the right thing? Because when we conform, we do it out of, not because we want to be a conformist. Nobody says that, but we do it because it's safe, and we do it because it's convenient. It's easier. But that's all you get when you conform, is safety and convenience. And that's great, but it's not a life worth living. And so that's what the book's going to be about.
I love it. That's so awesome. When's it come out? Just so our audience can be aware of it.
Right now, August of 24.
Wow. I love it. It's so exciting. Congratulations, Graham. Because for everybody out there, Graham just signed his book deal this morning.
Yeah, it actually hasn't been signed yet, but they agreed to do it yesterday. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So we're literally less than 24 hours into this kind of breaking news for Graham, and ultimately something that will impact you guys in a big way. And so we'll be sure that when that book comes out, we'll have Graham back on again to dive into it in depth, provide you guys with access to it. But also in the meantime, before you guys go, Graham, where can they find more about you? Where can they get more access to what you're all about? Learn more from you, get access to your book, how to get paid for what you know, and your show, and just more of everything that is Graham Cochrane.
Yeah, everything's at grahamcochrane.com. If you want to get the first couple of chapters of the book for free to get a sense of not only the book, but really the business model that I teach in that book, just go to grahamcochrane.com/chapters. You get the first 2 chapters for free. And then if you like to hang out on Instagram, that's probably the only place that I'll hang out online, is at the Graham Cochrane.
I love it. I love it. So Graham, again, along with all of this, we often ask our guests, what is the definition in a word or phrase that you would define as ownership?
One word or phrase, I would probably say responsibility. Just responsibility. I think
responsibility and taking ownership it goes hand in hand. We've had so many guests lean into that, and listeners, you guys have heard that time and time again, that take ownership and responsibility for what you can control, and for everything else, be able to submit and be obedient to what you're being asked to do. And that responsibility is really our sole responsibility, the only thing that we are responsible for. And you can ultimately realize results just exactly like Graham has. And so, guys, as you go forward, I really want you to lean into this and know that imposter syndrome will hold you back, not because it's not what you're supposed to be doing, but it's because it's going to question the gift that God has given you. And ultimately, when you lean into that, it's not about you. It's not about bolstering your name from the rooftops, not about having your name and face in lights, but rather you are there to serve. You're there to pour into people and ultimately show up out of a knowing, out of a love, and out of an impact sense. You will be blessed 30, 60, 100-fold in how you show up and how you take obedience to that, because I want you to lean on the ability to serve. Take responsibility for that group. Not that you're taking responsibility for showing up and saying, hey, I'm here, but take responsibility for the people that you are serving. When you take responsibility for the people you're serving, your purpose will ultimately become somebody else's miracle. And that is the change and impact that you were meant to be. When you lean into that God-given calling, when you lean into that purpose, that is when your life will change. We know success is different. So own your different. Say yes to different. We'll see you next week.